in human life, it's really in civilization that human beings become miserable. It's when we're not living in the woods. And I snow camped for 20 years, and there was something in the immediacy of snow camping that kept me in touch with that more primitive freedom yet consequences right there and there. And the shoulds and shouldn'ts of my civilized lives weren't right there for me. It was simply how to work, how to not freeze, how to, going to places I'd never been before, or having snow bury my tent in 4 feet of snow one night while I was sleeping, and opening up the door while the tent was collapsed on me, coming out of collapse, and just seeing snow, having to dig my way out. So this immediacy was of a different sort, but it gave me permission when I went back into my human life to not be as bound by the rules of the world that otherwise bind us. So I didn't have the same level of density of being good or being, bad. I didn't have that as a clear. I had curiosity. I had discovery. I had willingness to discover. So that in this way, the inner struggle was less dense in many ways than most of you that I work with, because we bought into it. We bought into the agreement, and we found our little piece of happiness in our skill set, in our education, in our success in the world, in our relationship, in our children, in our our family, existing family, if it's you're fortuitous not to have a good family, in the circumstance of our life. And so most of it is an inward battling. Matter of fact, by not having an outward battling and it goes inward, there's no resolution on inner battling. Because unless it's grounded in a domain similar to our physical body, it can't complete. And we try to complete in our relationship with others, but really it comes down to us meeting the thing that is the experience that we didn't want to meet in the reality of our lived life. That's where we come to resolution. No other domain has the consequences of our choice. This is the domain of karma. This is the domain of consequences. It only exists because we have a physical body which can die, which can hurt, which can enjoy pleasure, which can reflect all the possible experience of nature. Any other domain, there are no consequences, or there are subtler consequences, but they don't have the consequences of this life. These are very tangible learning experiences. When we can convert our imaginings into reality, there are no imaginings left. There is only reality. And what is the reality? I exist. I'm here. I attend to that which is aligned with my purpose. I live to manifest or be a manifesting means of that purpose. That's what it's like to live in existence in this dimension. And then the effort and the struggle fall away because it becomes effortless to apply effort when it's aligned with the purpose of the light of the purpose that you're aligned with. Then that does yoga. That brings everything that's needed, that allows us to go beyond ourselves. In the second chapter of the Mother Book, it says this: all that is done in the universe, the divine through his Shakti, behind all actions, but is veiled by his Yogamaya and works through the ego of the jiva in the lower nature, the jiva, the individual person. The soul, the yoga also, in yoga also, it is the divine who is the seeker and who does the sadhana, the practice. It is his Shakti with her light, power, knowledge, consciousness, Satchitananda, acting upon the ego. And when it is open to her, pouring into it with these divine forces, it is this which is open to her, pouring into it with these divine forces that makes the sadhana possible. But so long as the lower nature is active, the personal effort of the seeker remains necessary. And then he goes on into what is that personal effort. and that is aspiration, rejection, and surrender. I mean, there's many ways to language this. This is one that's useful to know. The will to open and make plastic the physical consciousness and nature. Rejection of the movements of the lower nature. Rejection of the minds, ideas, opinions, preferences, habits, constructions, so that the true knowledge may find free room in a silent mind. Rejection of the vital natures, desires, demands, cravings, sensations, passions, selfishness, pride, arrogance, lust, greed, jealousy, envy, hostility to the truth, so that the true power and joy may pour from stupidity, doubt, disbelief, obscurity, obstinacy, pettiness, laziness, unwillingness to change, tamas, so that the true stability of light, power, ananda, may establish itself in a body growing always more divine. Surrender of oneself and all one is and has, and every plane of the consciousness and every movement to the divine and the Shakti. He knows what we're talking about. The Mother Book is a terrific aid to be in remembrance of where you put your will. That where you put your will, where it serves the ego, you will diminish your access. Even if it's the negative ego that thinks she's the only justification of her existence is, I'm not worthy, I don't deserve to exist. Shame becomes a strategy of ego to keep in existence. Or as it will, where I'm so great, I'm so powerful, people are ignorant and stupid and I'm the only one who knows better. Both of these are the same creation. A strategy to get or a strategy to avoid, basically. And when you can find that strategy in yourself, you can begin to dismantle it. So we talked about shame yesterday, and the issue of shame is a strategy of the ego to keep in existence, to avoid existence. There's a whole list, a litany of things from someone who really knew her shame. That was an addendum to that conversation to begin to explore how you use shame to avoid existing, to avoid having to meet life, to be right about this isn't where I should be. See, we find these, and then we dismantle their truth. We quit believing them. We quit following their dictates. We quit responding and reacting or judging life from that paradigm. So it is a rejection. It's a refusal to continue to give your consent. So those things may exist, but you refuse to let them shape and decide what's possible for you. And you can't do that yourself. You could only align your will to something greater that will then do it for you. That's the power of your intent when you awaken. You can intend miracles, and the force will come in and bring you from that which couldn't imagine a miracle to that which is miraculous. If you could keep aligned with that intent. If you could organize your outer life so that your intent becomes real. And what is that intent? Intent is to be found. It's not something we declare, although declaring it helps sometimes to get to it. The intent is to come into existence more fully, aligned with something greater than yourself, to serve the purpose of existence, the evolutionary unfolding of the possibility of life. So I kind of got it in a level that I hadn't gotten it before, and then the next weekend, same thing happens again, and so I say, okay, all right, it's clear. Something's going on. It blew out all my socks, all my paradigms. I know that it was real, and everything in me that knows anything real, materially, emotionally, mentally, in my psychic awareness. And then it became a reversal. Okay, well then, how do I move into alignment with it? And that is the beginning of a transitional time, which took 9 months. And there was a dedication of my life for that to happen, and learning to live with it, and then the continuing deepening of what it was. But there was also in me then that part that was needy, that wanted to be assured it wouldn't go away. And when that would take over, it would go away. And then it would be, oh my God, did it go? And there would be this worry and this wanting to get it back and this struggling to get it back. And what can I do? And I started doing some really, extreme tapasas. I stopped sleeping. I decided to become celibate. I started fasting again. And I used to fast all the time. I started fasting. All these extreme, and it didn't really come back like it was. So I got in the way of it staying. It was ready to come, obviously. If I just did what I did and let her do the work, it would have gone much more smoothly. And that struggle was there then for off and on, because it would come through. It wouldn't come through with the same fullness. It wouldn't come through with the same sort of like innocent abandonment. It had now this human ego laying claim to it, making it important, so on and so forth. So that became the obstacle. So that's the nature. How do we bring it in for it to land and stay with us long enough to do its work? Is a organization of our consciousness where we step out of our ego's agenda to make it last into your will, not my will. So I learned to accept when it went from a different place than what my ego was vested in. And to say, okay, here I am doing what I need to do, and it's not here at this moment. And I could experience that, and I allowed for that to be as if that was going to be the truth. That she showed me these things, and then she leaves for me to figure out and prepare myself some more. And when I took that attitude, it came very quickly. It came back. And I got out of the way of making it happen, and I allowed it to happen. And that's when I discovered what we just read from Sri Aurobindo. That we let go of the parts of ourselves that are habituated to serving our self-will, to serving Divine's will, because she knew, okay, it's enough. And she pulled back. She only gave in that first part so she could convince my ego that I couldn't ignore her. Then it was about me learning to surrender to her. And it was truly like that. It was a tangible feminine energy, Shakti energy that came to me. And then I went to India, and then I found the other side of the mother, which was the father, and then that was the Arunachala, and then there was a whole nother journey. But it was all about discovering rather than making happen. And discovering was something that was there right then. For example, when the Shakti pulled away, when it was time for me to go to truth, it was like a desert for the human ego in me that had surrendered to her, and now she's gone. And for about 3 months, I continued my practice. I was living on an ashram. I did not have any money. I gave everything away. I only had my return airfare ticket. And it was all my human mind stuff came back. Oh, this is a mistake. How did I get stuck in this awful place? It was extremely uncomfortable for my human system. I had no distractions. I hadn't brought anything with me. I couldn't find an English book to read. At that time, I didn't. And there was a library that had English books, but I didn't know that at that time. There was a coffee shop there, which I never knew there was a coffee shop either. But the principle being is I had no distractions, and all I could do was learn to be in this stripped out place where I let go of the parts of me that couldn't have let go of if she was still there. And that Roto-Rooter prepared me to know truth, which is that sought principle that I recognized when it came was the source of the mother. That was the father to the mother, not the husband to the mother, the father to the mother. And that this was where it ends up, into this eternal, unchanging, unbounded quality of my own self-existent existence. And it wasn't about the universe or anything outside. It was all here. And then that became established. And then when that became established, the Shakti came back. So that they both joined me. And where the Shakti came back is when I started working with other people. And that's when the Shakti came back. So I came out of the Shiva and I became the Shakti because there were people who were turning to what it was I had become. So this is the Shakti component for me. But it's also the Shiva. So it's this fierce grace, and there is this loving holding. They're simultaneously available. When we surrender to divine will, we become something we couldn't imagine. And when we become something we couldn't imagine, it takes years and years and years to recognize what it is that you've become. Because there's no precedence. Even in the teachings, and many teachers, which I've read many since my awakening, to find a similar thing has been hard. I find versions of it, one or the other, but not both. So the nature of what is both, I think, is a Western creation, that it's a Western system that was so grounded in the material world that it could eventually bring back both the Shakti and the Shiva. But there are teachers that have variations of this, and for every teacher who's traveled on the path teaching as awareness, they become a Shakti form. And every teacher who's gone on the path of the Shakti, of the love, of the devotion, they become a Shiva form. They become the teachers, they become the awareness. So I do know ultimately we end up with both. But the surrendering to Divine's will is the highest sacrifice of the self-will. And the evidence of it, when we turn to Spirit, is directly and tangibly felt when you do it and when you don't. And that becomes your doorway to know there's a lie in you, or there's a structure in you, or there's a conditioning veil in you. And you know it through an experience of dejection. Because you become it. Even though you have this higher state, you become the diminished self. And when you become that, it takes a period of time, but it gets dissolved in what you've come to. And it disappears. So the more we can actually be in our dejection, the more we can be in our diminished self and hold it and not be overtaken by it, the more it moves, the quicker it moves, and the more we become even more capable of diving into that which is still veiled and obscured. Eventually, we become a quality of consciousness that dissolves ignorance, not just its own, but for others. It becomes a quality of presence that the very presence itself undoes in you what you couldn't do yourself. This is why in the history of India, surrendering to the Guru was the highest art of making progress. Because the force that they could come to you when you were in a surrendered state would inhabit you and do the very things that we speak of as your efforting and inquiry and finding your shame and all these other things. Do it for you. And then the progress is assured.